So that song you just heard, Holy Now, is one of my absolute favorites. It originally came out early in my high school years. And what that meant is that I first heard it when I was a Unitarian Universalist teen in the midst of my 6 years attending Catholic school. So you can probably imagine some of what resonated about it. But I think why it spoke to me the most is that it offered something that was in between the two versions of religion that I was being offered in the moment. On the one hand, I was raised in this beautiful and loving and very secular Unitarian Universalist fellowship. It was a small community of people who were deeply defined by what they were not. The emphasis was very much about what we were rejecting and not so much about what we uniquely embraced as Unitarian Universalists. Now, this made sense in our context. We were located in this very most Catholic part of Minnesota, and so it was true that in our community, to be not Catholic was its own identity. And so we were a fellowship and not a church. We had talks on Sunday mornings and not sermons. We had Sunday programs and not worship. And we definitely, for sure, didn't use the word holy. I love that community. And I'm so grateful for the values with which they raised me. And at the same time, there were things that didn't always fit for me. As I grew into my Unitarian Universalism, and unlike the adults in the church, I didn't have another religion to reject. I found myself wanting my Unitarian Universalism to go deeper. I was craving a space for holiness. Now, at the same time, I was attending Catholic school with all its trappings. Twice monthly mass, theology classes, prayer services every week. We didn't have any nuns, but there were plenty of priests and monks in the leadership. They were absolutely a church. They worshiped a lot, and they were very clear about what was holy and what was not. I am also very grateful to that community for awakening within me a spirituality that I didn't know I had, for inspiring a deep love of ritual, and for pushing me to think more deeply about my own faith. They didn't turn me Catholic by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that they made me more deeply Unitarian Universalist. So it was in that context of between two worlds, one with no declared holiness at all, and one with deep partitions between what was holy and what was not, that I first heard that Peter Mayer song. And it spoke right to my heart. Even before I heard the song, I had this sense that neither of the versions of holiness I was being taught felt quite right to me. I didn't understand the deep separation between holy and unholy, sacred and profane that I saw in Catholicism. And at the same time, I couldn't quite believe that holiness was non-existent either. Even as a teenager, I had already had those primal experiences of reverence that Kendall Gibbons talks about. Sometimes they had been in the context of one of those two religious communities, and sometimes not. The feeling was there, though I could not necessarily put a name to it. And Peter Mayer's song helped me put words to that sense that there was still holiness to be found, even as a Unitarian Universalist. It was, in many ways, the best of both worlds. Rather than rejecting the idea of holiness and thus ceding it to other, more traditional faiths, Mayer reclaims it instead. He deepens and expands the category of holiness beyond God and heaven and the rituals of the traditional church to encompass our everyday world. without denying the holiness of those other things as well. He says, read a questioning child's face and say it's not a testament. That'd be very hard to say. See another new morning come and say it's not a sacrament. I tell you that it can't be done. Everything is holy now, he says. And this is where I think we can begin to understand a Unitarian Universalist idea of holiness. It begins with that primal sense of reverence. It begins with the idea that holiness is expansive, that it can be found everywhere, that there is, in fact, an abundance of holiness in our world. But I'm not sure that's where our idea of holiness ends. If the statement that everything is holy is the fullness of what we believe about our world. Because not everything is holy, right? Not everything is beautiful and good. Not everything speaks to our hearts in that primal way. We know for sure that there are just a couple unholy things happening in our country right now. I don't believe it's holy to tear families apart. It's not holy to let people go hungry out of spite. It's not holy to deny the humanity of whole groups of people. Saying that everything is holy now is not quite accurate enough. It may be more accurate to say that everything has the potential for holiness within it, just as each of us have within us the potential for good and the potential for evil. So if we don't want to gatekeep holiness, claiming it for only certain people and certain places, certain objects and certain words, but at the same time we can't claim everything as holy, how do we begin to sort it out, to narrow it down? This question of what is and is not holy goes back to the very beginning of religion. There are many religious anthropologists out there who name this task of separating the holy from the unholy, the sacred from the profane, as the central task that religion has played for humanity over the years. It's one of the ways that we humans have sought to make sense of our world, by naming some things as holy and some things as not. Having that categorization is comforting. It prevents a feeling of overwhelm, and it orients us in a universe that is so much bigger than we are. This was especially helpful when there were very few scientific explanations for the way that the world worked. If you look at the ways some things and places were categorized, this was very much about safety and protection. Don't eat this because it might make you sick. Don't go there because it is dangerous. The idea of holiness is actually all about categorization. But used too much in this way, it can easily get in the way of primal reverence. It can get away from that primal experience of reverence, that sense of awe and wonder, of purpose and commitment. It can become only about rules and rituals followed by rote. It can become creeds set too much in stone, static understandings of holiness that don't make any room for the current experience of being human. Any faith, tradition, even ours, runs the risk of becoming static. I think this is often what Unitarian Universalists react against when we shy away from talking about holiness. We are worried that we will become stagnant, unthinking, or unfeeling, that we'll stop experiencing that primal reverence, that our faith will go stale. But when we use that as an excuse to reject holiness altogether, there is a way in which that becomes gatekeeping of holiness in the reverse. We don't lose the ability to experience primal reverence, but we do lose the tools and the permission to talk about it, to learn from those experiences. This is a loss, because it is by bringing those experiences into community that we are able to make sense of the world. Just like our ancient ancestors, we gather in community to make meaning out of our lives, to figure out what it is that matters most, to name the holy and to learn from it. What sets Unitarian Universalism apart from other tradition in terms of our vision of holiness, of what is holy, is that we seek to be constantly learning and growing, transforming in our vision of what is holy. And we do this not with particular rules about what can or can't be holy, but with our own experiences of holiness, with that primal reverence. We begin with those experiences and we bring them together in community to make sense of them, to make sense of our world, to create together some sense of order and meaning, because we still want things to be categorized in some way, right? Even when we resist categorization. We actually practiced this as a congregation very deliberately back in 2018 and 2019. It was part of a process we went to write down some of what it is that this congregation is all about, our values, mission, and ends. It was a process that took a lot of conversations and a lot of discernment by your board of trustees. Near the end of the process, we were invited to do an exercise called the Experience of the Holy. In the middle of a Sunday morning service, we invited everyone gathered to reflect on a time that they had experienced the holy, whatever that might mean to them, that primal reverence. We invited people to think about a time where they had gasped in wonder or felt that whisper of purpose within them. Once everyone had thought of an experience, people paired up and shared their stories. I wonder if those of you who were there that day remember what story you told. I wonder what story you might tell today. Once both partners had shared, we invited folks to consider the values embedded in those stories, using words or short phrases that captured the quality of the experience and what it was that made it holy. Now, I had never done this exercise before, doing it here in this congregation, and I'll admit I was a little bit skeptical at first that we would come up with anything useful, that this exercise of starting with our experiences of the holy could elucidate what our values were. And I was especially worried since I thought some of you might just get stuck at the word holy, and I wanted you to keep going. But the stories you all came up with were beautiful and certainly holy. Some were about nature, others were about community, some were about church, and many were not. People shared about birth and death, sunshine and moonlight, feelings of connection and comfort, awe and inspiration, empowerment and hope. I still have the 148 pages of stories and values that were generated that day. And when I read them, I can feel the holiness in it all. That primal reverence comes through. From all that holiness gathered together, our board came up with 4 core values that we now name. Hopefully some of you will recognize these. Wonder, authentic connection, courageous community, love in action. These are the values that we seek to embody always as a congregation. And they also speak to what we believe is holy. When I try to answer the question, what is holiness? off the cuff, I have a little bit of a hard time figuring out what to say. The answer that there is holiness everywhere is true, but it doesn't feel specific enough. But when I read our UU Nashua core values, I think, yes, that's it. That is what holiness looks like. Wonder, authentic connection, courageous community, love in action. The experience of primal reverence passed through the meaning-making lens of community. That is how we find holiness together. As Kendall Gibbons says, it is one thing to have the night sky take your breath away and leave you feeling both exhilarated and humbled. It's even better when someone else says, I know what you mean. I've had that feeling too. It's one thing to contemplate with poignant gratitude the sacrifices that were made for the sake of your freedom. It's something different when a whole community remembers and gives thanks together. May we here find together the holiness that we know exists in abundance in our world, the holiness that is everywhere, and may we lift it up to guide us in our lives moving forward. May it be so.